This was inspired by the incident of Gordon Kahl and his problems with the government. Okay, ready?
Yeah.
Federal fanatics are found in the U.S. Marshals. They're like a bloodthirsty tribe of cannibals. They break the law with impunity, then plead sovereign immunity. Federal fanatics are mad dog animals.
Authorities say the prime suspect is a radical survivalist, a fanatic, an ultra-right-wing tax rebel. Tonight they're also calling him a killer. Frank Courier has the story of a bizarre case of death and taxes.
He told me some stuff, you know, that, my goodness, at the time he told me, I thought he's crazy. But nothing that he ever told me that has come to pass wasn't true.
What am I charged with?
Yeah.
I'm charged with murdering 2 U.S. federal marshals and the wounding of several other officers.
5205, 41. 5205, go ahead. 52 6 is DOA. 5200 DOA. 5207 badly injured. 10-4, copy.
I was tried illegally, I was sentenced illegally, and as far as I'm concerned, the whole thing is illegal from start to finish.
You can't fight the government.
He never owed any money.
I don't think he's dead.
Everything was a lie. You cut off his hands, his feet, pay your taxes.
An emergency in Medina.
I felt his anymore.
I don't think he's dead. I don't think he's dead. I don't think he's dead.
Sure did, yeah. We had a change that we didn't know was going to happen. Delta Airlines didn't tell us that they needed 2 hours to transfer. And so when I get to Salt Lake City, what I didn't know was they were going to let me go on the same plane, and they were going to take the casket and keep it at Salt Lake for 2 hours. So I can't allow that because the chain of evidence would be broken. So at the last minute, my secretary, Theresa, who you talked to, had to get on the phone and try to find me a way to wait and get on the flight with the casket. They had 1 seat left, so I was able to make it. So that worked out okay. Hate to get to L.A. and there's Dr. Noguchi, and he said, "Where's the body?" I'll say, "I don't know." You know, we almost did that. I'd be so embarrassed. Well, it was on here when I, when I got on, you know.
When you first called me, I was concerned of the fact that you were going to do a documentary about all these wonderful ideas of how people could avoid paying taxes. And I was concerned about that because when any one of us reneges on our responsibility to pay our fair share, that means all the rest of us that are complying have to pull a heavier load.
In 1969, before, like I call it April Fool's Day, April 15th, he wrote them a letter, and he addressed it to the tithing collectors of the Synagogue of Satan, Washington, D.C. And he wrote them a letter saying that he was taking he and his family out of their system, and he told them all the reasons why.
Nobody likes to pay taxes, and it is the citizens' responsibility and right to protest those laws that they do not agree with, that they do not find fair. But until those laws are changed, as citizens of the United States, they are expected to comply with them.
People, they're bleeding the people with their money. They're working half a year for the federal government to destroy them.
IRS selects people to prosecute because they fail to comply with the law, willfully fail to comply with the law.
He never owed any money.
Byron, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good. We're getting good reception. We're just waiting for the backhoe now. Mark's here. And we're ready to go as soon as the heavy equipment gets here. Did you copy?
Yes, we did. We just sitting here waiting here, just waiting. I just pushed the wrong button, that's all.
Okay, good. Stand by, and I'll talk to you a little later, okay?
Will do.
Well, I was very young. Too young. Well, anyway, we lived close by, probably 2 miles apart, and I never knew Gordon when I was growing up. And he said he knew me because he said he used to see me and he'd, think about me even when he was growing up too. And then one day, I was only 13 years old. My brother-in-law had a cream station there where the farmers used to bring in cream and sell it, and I was sitting in there, and he said he drove up beside the station there, and he said he saw me sitting in there. And he said he knew that this was what he wanted. Gordon was a very sentimental person. He was so gentle and so kind, and I liked that. Pearl Harbor was attacked December 7th. That's when he enlisted, because he felt then that every able-bodied man should go to war and save his country. Just fill me through and through. I'm getting sentimental over you. He served 57 bombing missions over that CBI area, China, Burma, India area, and he was wounded. And then in September of 1945, he was honorably discharged from the Air Force. He came back to the States the end of December, and we were married on the 6th of January.
My friends, this whole system of income taxation has degenerated into a racket in which the public tries to cheat the government and the government tries to rob the public.
It was shortly after he came home from the war when he began to see the country as a whole, how it was going. For one thing, when he went to the war, there wasn't all these welfare programs. And he come back from the war, and here was people on welfare, and everything looked so good. And he couldn't, he said when he landed in the States, he just felt like something wasn't right.
One day, Gordon and I were talking. Something came up, and he said, oh yeah, he said Franklin Roosevelt knew about Japanese going to bomb Pearl Harbor 2 or 3 weeks before they did it. My God, the hair on the back of my neck stood up, because all my life, all I'd ever known about Franklin Roosevelt, that he was a hero, he saved the people. He
said it really bothered him when he would think of all those villages that he had to strafe, and bomb innocent women and children, all for nothing.
Moreover, it is a wholly un-American system of taxation, which aggravates class distinctions.
So then now everybody was on, these farm programs. These farmers were getting pretty big checks for farming the way the government wanted them to. So Gordon thought he'd try that.
And increases class hatred.
He believed we were done it wrong, and I think we are myself. All this crooked crap going on today, And then the people all of a sudden, they, well, looky here what's happening. Savings and loan deal for one thing.
He told them, he said, I just came up to tell you I'm not going to be in your farm program any longer. And they said, well, you can't do that. You've already signed your name. And he said, well, just take my name off it. He said, I'm going to go home and farm it the way I want to. He said, I can't make any money this way. Well, they said, you're getting this check from the government. He said, well, you keep that check. He said, I don't want that.
And tends to divide our homogeneous people into the two extremes of communism and fascism.
He told me after World War II he spent 2 years studying communism to actually get set in his own mind what it was.
Well, he did it. He came home and he planted 100 acres of barley and the rest into wheat. And we had a bumper crop that year and we paid off our whole place. Well, now he said, there's something wrong. He said, there's some kind of control over us. He said that I don't like. Now he said, we're going to have to find out where this is all coming from.
He said it's straight from the devil.
I was a police instructor, and if we lose officers in a shootout or some type of a tragic situation, we will get reports on these, review them, and find out what could have been done differently to prevent the loss of life. I saw immediately that there was severe violations. The most basic arrest procedures were violated. Kahl was wanted for a misdemeanor. And to explain to the audience what a misdemeanor is, a traffic ticket's a misdemeanor. And I couldn't understand that.
Because we didn't believe in going into debt. We didn't have enough money to carry us over till the next crop, so for the winters we would go south. Then we started going to Texas.
I think it was the second payday. I handed him his check, and he looked at it and he said, oh, I forgot to tell you. Said, I meant to tell you this time. Said, you took Social Security out of my check the first time. And I meant to tell you before this payday not to do it anymore. I thought, my Lord, I said, what are you talking about, Gordon? He said, well, I don't belong to the Social Security program. I said, what do you mean you don't belong to it? I said, that's like living and dying. He said, that's what everybody thinks. He said, but you don't have to participate in it.
So in 1968, he said this would be the last year he would pay into them. And I thought he was just bluffing. See, I had little children. We had 6 children, and I was worried. And I was like all other mothers and wives, and I'm sure I looked at these little ones and wondered what the outcome of it would be if he really quit all this that he was saying. You know, we had to do these things.
Every time I'd send in a quarterly report down where you're supposed to put an employee's Social Security number, I would write form so-and-so, so-and-so. I can't remember that number, but whatever it was, those people didn't even know what it was.
They told him that he would have to meet with their tax court in Washington, D.C. And he said, you don't have a tax court. All you've got is a kangaroo court.
So they'd write me another letter, and I'd call them. I'd say, look, this man has withdrawn from Social Security. Whether it's right or not, I don't know.
Now, he said, if you want to talk to me, he said, I'm more than willing to talk to you. I would like to educate you people on this issue. He said, so come and see me.
And at that time, wages being what they were, and as many kids as Gordon had at home, there was no withholding tax. I mean, he just wasn't making that kind of money because I think he had all of his kids at home, plus 1 or 2 grandkids.
They just wrote us letters and said they were coming after us, but they never did. And of course, I was always, you know, really worried about it, but I finally didn't pay too much attention anymore.
We're hoping that this exhumation and second autopsy will let us know exactly how Gordon Kahl, or I should say the alleged Gordon Kahl at this point, because we're not even sure that it is Gordon Kahl that's buried here in Eaton, North Dakota, to identify his remains and to find out how he perished and whatever other information we can gather, and perhaps lay to rest some of the stories that have abounded since 1983, that his body was dismembered and it was intentionally burned and so forth. So we're hoping that this autopsy will lay to rest a lot of those stories and possibly come up with enough information to help our case.
The entrance was located on the crown, on the right crown of the head.
Kahl was shot behind the right ear. The sheriff was shot in the left arm.
The bullet went through the arm, shattered the humerus.
With his arm in the air, right?
They alternate simultaneous shots, and Gordon shot the sheriff, and the sheriff spontaneously shot and hit the man in the head.
He had to be the India rubber man. He had to have an arm 40 feet long and curved around, you know. There's no way in this world he could have, that the sheriff could have shot Kahl head on, or that Kahl could have shot the sheriff. Either way.
We believe that he basically pulled out his gun and executed Gordon Kahl right there.
Oh, we gotta stop the annex, the federal fanatics, they're a menace to society. There's nothing any worse than federal fanatics, except maybe the KGB.
They always treated me like a second son when I was in the family there. Go and stay with them. I'd stay over there. The boys would stay with me. We were close. We were always like brothers. First time I met Yori would have been around 4th grade or somewhere, 4th, 5th grade.
Well, you know, I remember an incident. I'll tell you about it because it's something I thought about a lot of times. We were, when I was a kid, my dad really liked pheasants, for example. And I remember, you know, he taught us, you know, if you see a horned owl, shoot him, because he's a terrible parasite or a terrible predator on these pheasants and grouse and small game. I remember one time a horned owl landed in some trees about 3/4 of a mile from our place, and Dad got me and my brother, and he said, look, there's a horned owl down here, and we're going to go get him. So, you know, off we went. I had a little 16-gauge single shot, which belonged to my grandfather. And, matter of fact, the feds stole that, too. And my brother had a little 20-gauge shotgun, double-barrel, that my dad bought my mom right after they got married. They took that, too.
Well, Yori was named after a wartime friend of Gordon's. And this guy was, if I remember correctly, was the tail gunner in Gordon's B-25. And he was killed during a mission in the Second World War, and being close friends, he named his firstborn son with the name Yori.
So I was walking in towards the trees from the edge of the field, and a big jackrabbit took off. I was maybe 6 years old, and I seen this big white tail flopping, and I pulled up and shot it. And I was just happy as could be. It scared the horned owl away, but I was happy.
I can remember just being little, you know, on a trip driving down the highway, and Daddy, he'd be He'd be sitting there sleeping, you know, with his foot on the gas pedal, and Yori would be hanging over his shoulder, you know, steering, driving down the
I drug it up there, and Dad looked at me, and he looked at this rabbit, and he shook his head like this, and he said, that's not a cottontail. And I grabbed the tail and I said, well, look, you know, I thought that's how you determined which rabbit was which. If it looked like the tail was made out of cotton, right?
Daddy was always teaching, you know. He was just a very mild kind of a person, and I mean, he was never like harsh or hard.
He said, not only is that a jackrabbit, he said, that's a mama rabbit. You know, and he showed me her tits, and I felt her belly, and I could feel the little ones inside of her. She was just ready to have them. And he said in a couple of days she would have had those baby rabbits. And he said, now all those baby rabbits are going to die. And I was just tore up. I mean, I was crying, you know. And, you know, I wanted him to cut the baby rabbits out and let me take them home. You know, it was my job to take care of them because, you know, I killed their mother. And he said, no, they wouldn't make it.
Yori and Grandpa had the same compassion and the gentle spirit, just the gentleness about them.
And I've never forgotten that. And time again, I think back at that little, but I remember a lot of incidents like that. And I mean, because he would never shoot anything unless it needed to be shot, you know. And that includes U.S. Marshals.
Maniacs with a badge and a gun, what would you do if they gunned your son? Federal fanatics brought on their own downfall.
Guys, pull down a little farther where you can see us and stand by. The police have just shown. Do not come in the cemetery, though. We may have trouble. I was invited to come to Arkansas to do an investigation. And when I stepped off the footage and was able to see the distances, I knew immediately that what government said happened didn't happen. So this was so traumatic for me as a law enforcement person to know that government agents had fabricated this story and not understanding why and who did kill these two individuals. I had a number of sleepless nights. I didn't want to go it alone. I'd gone it alone all this time. But this time I wanted some officers, unbiased, totally having no set notion of what had happened, to come in with me from various parts of the country and evaluate the whole case and come to some conclusions. With all the evidence we've gathered now, we have so much evidence to point to the fact that the police officers themselves are the ones that killed the sheriff and killed whoever this person was.
They had to bring in a flamethrower or something. It all shows right here. Yeah, the flamethrower would have done what they you know, claimed all this heat did.
That led us to the definite conclusion that mattresses had been brought from the back of the house and taken and placed over the body while it was lying on the floor.
He found diesel fuel here, he found diesel fuel here, he found diesel fuel here.
The first case, the charred body, presumably was Gordon Wendel's car.
I called Joan Kahl in California. She's heard innuendos and stories ever since 1983 that perhaps that wasn't her husband. And there is conflicting evidence in the autopsy report to prove that it is her husband, and also evidence to prove it is not her husband. So she asked that this be allowed so that she could get on with her life.
Well, okay, see you later, Mark. Okay, take it easy.
Yeah. Okay, everything's okay. The police are going to be leaving, so take up a position where they won't have to stop you and ask you what you're doing. Do you copy?
Copy.
Gordon was not a radical man here in our community. I know he did get the Sheriff Posse Comitatus started here in Crane. They had a few meetings, and he had several members in there. I knew they had badges and different things like that. In fact, Gordon had a Dodge pickup that he rode around and had Sheriff Posse Comitatus star on the side of it, both sides of it.
The Congress of the United States passed the Posse Comitatus Act before the turn of the century, and the purpose of the Posse Comitatus was to assist the sheriff when he needed help, and anyone between the ages of 15 and 45 were automatically members of the posse.
It just wasn't that strong. It's mostly that they didn't believe in taxes.
At the time was ripe. The Permian Basin was probably the largest explosion of tax resistance in the whole country. There was a potential there for a real organization.
It would remind me a lot of if you've ever gone to like an Amway meeting or something like that.
Federal agents obtained permission from the Justice Department to classify Posse Comitatus as a domestic terrorist group.
It was the means of them taking into their own hands power which they delegated to their own servants. You know, government is theoretically, government is a servant.
In order for the Justice Department to be able to use the terrorist label, the group or person so classified must display at least one of the following 4 tendencies: avowed intent to overthrow the government, substantial interference with the actions of a foreign government. Who does that remind you of? Mr. George Bushnikov.
Yeah, sometimes at these meetings they'd really get going and get the rhetoric built up, and they'd get some real oratories going sometimes.
Depriving citizens of their constitutional rights. The IRS is more guilty of that than anyone in this country that I know of. They're always depriving citizens of their constitutional rights. Actually, constitutional rights is a little bit of a misnomer because our rights are inalienable. They're from God, and the Constitution protects those rights.
But that was it. And, you know, as far as I know, it's never been against the law to get up and do as big an oratory as you want on anybody, criticizing them or putting forth your own point of view or whatsoever. It doesn't matter really how radical the speech gets, because it's only speech.
But he told me, he said, we're finally getting a deal, we're going to have a deal on TV. They're going to interview us on TV about some of this tax stuff that's illegal. And he said, and when they do, he said, that's when they're going to put the heat on me.
The following program has been bought by the United Tax Action Patriots of 206 North Colorado, Midland, Texas.
Good evening. The title of this program is Taxpayers' Rights versus IRS Power. I'm Frank Brown, and I will be your moderator for the next 30 minutes. A politician once said that the art of taxation is sort of like plucking feathers from a chicken with the least amount of squawking. Are you tired of being plucked? I was.
He told the people that this income tax law was illegal, it is unlawful, and it was illegal plunder to rob the people, and their monies were being used for not to help us, but to destroy us.
Mr. Drexler, do you pay income tax?
No, I haven't paid any federal or state income tax or Social Security since 1964.
People were interested in listening to him.
Mm-hmm.
And as they were, he had a following.
I haven't paid the income tax, federal or state, since 1970.
He would be asked to speak at certain things, certain functions, and the following got great.
Do you pay the income tax?
No, not anymore.
we may have lost a critical piece of evidence, the foot.
When I was asked later why I became involved in investigating this instance, I told them that when this thing happened, I figured I was just like everybody else. It was interesting, but, you know, what was it to me? There's nothing that I know of in my life that left a more dramatic impression upon me than standing with another man and having inside the house, and when I stepped on a piece of metal, it flipped something out on the floor, and reaching down and picking it up and realizing what I held in my hands was the major portion of a human foot. There's nothing like that experience.
There was a meat cleaver hanging on that wall right there, and that meat cleaver ain't nowhere around.
Oh, yeah?
And it was a heavy one. I could chop off a leg with it. You know, it was for...
They cut off both the hands and...
And the feet. And one foot was found under that refrigerator 2 weeks later.
Say, oh, they dismember the man before his death. That's absolutely not true. This was no dismember. This consumed by the fire.
The container broken, Mark? Is it? Yeah. It deteriorated? Yeah. Doggone it. We might have lost our foot here. We were supposed to do a test to see if the foot belonged to the cadaver, the torso. And if the foot is dissolved and deteriorated to a certain point, we won't be able to tell if it was a part of the original body that was buried. That's the problem with it.
We do your papers in the IRS, all across the land. We're here to answer questions and lend a helping hand. We're here for serving people just like you. IRS.
Around the time that Gordon Kahl went on television and subsequently was holding these seminars in West Texas, almost 200 workers went to their employers and filed W-4 exemption forms, which precluded their employers from withholding their own income taxes. Thus, 200 former compliant, law-abiding taxpayers placed themselves in enormous fiscal endangerment that they would not have had enough paid in to cover their own taxes, and had some problems ahead of them.
Well, then things started moving. We got a call from, or got a letter from the investigators, special investigators from Lubbock, Texas. We were to meet with them in Odessa, Texas, which we did.
I'm a special agent with the Criminal Investigation Division, Internal Revenue Service in Lubbock, Texas.
There were 11 of us that met there that day with them, and they didn't like that. They said, this is between Gordon and us, but they said, no, we want to be some witnesses to this. So they let us all in there, and we identified ourselves and told them who we were. And
he brought his normal, which they usually do, bring in 10 or 12 people with them, with their tape recorders, and they sit there in the office with you and attempt to intimidate you.
Now, you would definitely say that for you to file and for you to pay federal income tax would be a violation of your conscience.
Oh, absolutely. It's as long as it's just...
He started talking about his religious beliefs and how he thought the income tax laws were unconstitutional, and basically that I was serving two gods, and I couldn't do that, and that I was going to hell.
All that anybody needs, any Christian, all they need to know about the income taxes is the second plank of the Communist Manifesto. You can't support Satan under the Communist Manifesto and call yourself a Christian at the same time. It's absolutely impossible. And I agree with that 100%. I've agreed with it for many years. I wrote to them in 1967, and I told them that never again would I give aid and comfort to the enemies of Christ.
I don't know. You start trying to buck somebody like the federal government, you're in trouble.
My majesty. Glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vengeance weather, breaks the wrath of the Lord. He has loosed the faithful lightning of his arrow. That's the only chain you got? His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
I can't believe it's that heavy, man.
Man.
I wouldn't listen to the handle. Okay.
Yeah, I think they wanted to squelch Gordon at the time because I think they felt like this man was setting a dangerous precedence as far as tax revolts go.
Indeed, this is one of the ways that Internal Revenue Service and other government agencies select cases that we recommend for prosecution, that they serve as an example and also as deterrence.
They then started manipulating the system, and things got out of hand to the point to where we're going to make little things big things.
I had heard that from people who knew him that they would watch TV, and if there was a police show on or something, that maybe they've even shot the TV screen out.
By the time it got to the top, these guys had already predetermined that, boy, we've got a really major anarchist out here trying to disrupt all that exists in U.S. society.
You got to take this puppy out again, right? Okay. Hey, we're going to need your muscles. We got to take it out again.
When we got into court and they arraigned me, the first thing the judge asked me, he said, "Do you understand the law and what you're being charged with?" And I said, "I understand God's law, but I'm not too good on Satan's law." And he said, I said, "I understand what Christ has given us." And he said, "There's two things," he said, "I don't want to hear in this court." And he said, "One of them is the Constitution of the United States, and the other one is the name of Jesus Christ." Well, I knew right then where we were headed for.
He probably did not have enough income to have owed any tax for those years. If there had been any, it would have been something really minimal.
You have said in the past that you had legal counsel there in Texas.
Yeah, it was legal, but I don't know whether they were helping me or working against me.
One of the things that complicated the trial was that during the trial, I came down with an infection on my foot that had started with a small cut.
That was what and they didn't make any bones about it. They accused him of selective prosecution, and they put this one IRS agent on it, and he said, "Yes," he said, "that's what it is." He said, we figured that they're more dangerous to us than the ordinary person that don't pay any income tax. So he said that was the purpose of it, was to get us out of circulation. And then freedom of speech and all that don't mean nothing.
I think the jury was out, I don't know, I want to say less than 15 minutes.
It really came as a big surprise when the jury brought in a verdict of guilty.
I mean, it didn't take them long to read the facts.
Going through this and seeing your dad being tried and being made out to be a petty criminal, which he definitely wasn't. I mean, he never at any time tried to say he was going to try to get away with this or anything else. He told them right what he was doing and what he stood for and everything else. But to have your dad made out to be like a petty criminal, this has got to have a severe effect on the kids at that time.
It was hard, you know. I mean, Daddy'd always been there.
You know, I asked him, I said, well, did you know that they were going to put you in prison when you went to court? And he told me, he said, yeah. I said, well, why did you do that then? He said, well, because he said I had the best case there was. He said there was no better case to beat this charge. There was no better case. And he said, He said, I had to prove to these other people that believed in the law, that believed in the power of the Constitution, that the Constitution is dead. And he said I had to sacrifice myself to do that.
What I was tried under was Title 267203, and they sentenced me to income tax evasion, which is Title 18-something.
What you were tried on is a civil offense.
Yeah, that's right.
You can't be incarcerated in a civil offense.
That's right. And they caught that when I got to Leavenworth. And this woman said, well, you don't even belong here. She showed me, and she said, I'm going to get that straightened out. And she said, you should be out of here in a few days. But the next time I saw her, I said, well, what did you find out? She said, they told me if I want to keep my job, to keep my nose out of there, out of whatever don't concern me.
So he's going on a trip, huh?
What was the sentence that the judge gave you?
A year on each count.
A year on each count. And how much time did you actually serve?
1 year.
You served a full year.
And no parole on them either. These guys that was in there for 5 years were getting out before I did. But those guys that are in there on anything like this, you served every day.
A couple of state troopers and myself were standing over under some trees all this time waiting for the FBI to decide what they wanted to do. When they finally came up with what they wanted to do, they wanted to try to put gas, put diesel, well, they wanted to put gas. And we decided against gas because it allowed to blow up my face. Put diesel down the vent pipe. Let the diesel run out down into the vent pipe. Well, during this time, it was smoke already coming out of the front of the windows that was broke out in front of the house.
Right.
Some say they couldn't tell where it was, you know, fire smoke or where it was tear gas because it'd been a world of tear gas already put in it. Anyway, he got the diesel ran down in there, and then Host and myself went back up on the roof, and I guess I probably put 3 or 4 grenades down in it, and I think Holston put about the same amount down in behind the diesel. But it wasn't just a few minutes. We had a pretty good fire. Yeah.
The federal government denied physically using the accelerant. And in fact, it was not a federal agent who physically poured the accelerant in the air vent. Is the reason that I think they changed their story to the extent that they were willing to accept the responsibility. I don't think it was ever admitted to that a government agent as such physically participated in the use.
We can't allow this thing these type of crimes, homicide, assassination, actually executions of individuals in the community, and have it covered up. If we start on that course, where would we end?
Long night.
Federal fanatics gotta be brought in line. We can no longer tolerate their kind. From North Dakota to Arkansas, they usurp power to break the law. Federal fanatics ought to all be doing time.
You know, I think we expected, or maybe the probation officer even expected, to have some problems with Gordon Kahl because of his views, and because he got convicted. We didn't think it was going to change his way of doing things.
It was after April 15th, and it was my job to say, Gordon, you have not complied. And I said, do you realize the consequences? And he said, yes.
I think they wanted me to fill out income tax papers, and I told them nothing doing. I would never fill out another one as long as I lived.
Gordon had told me so many times, and he had told federal agents 3 different times when they came out to the farm, he said, now, I want to be left alone. He said, I'm not giving government anything. I'm not taking anything from government. We're self-sustaining. And he said, I want me and my family to be out of the system and to be left alone. He said, I'll never go after you. But he said, if you ever come after me, I'll never back off.
I think there was a sense there that hey, if you're going to willfully break the law and go public with it and flaunt it and brag about it, then, you need to pay the price.
So then Bud Warren called Gordon the next day, and he said, yeah, but Gordon said, he said, you come out to see me. He said, we'll talk.
What Gordon is facing is possibly another year in an institution, camp someplace, or a total of 5 years satisfactory probation.
Bud and Gordon just got along real good. They had several other guys there, and Bud really, everybody liked Bud.
I just don't see any way of my fighting it any more than I already have. I did everything I could, and it just...
but you don't quit, Gordon.
Well, I'm not going to quit, but I'm going to quit that, because I could see how this court business is just like closing your head under the water.
He went back to Fargo, and they demoted him from a marshal to a deputy marshal, and they sent him to Grand Forks now because he was too sympathetic to the case, or to the family. Instead, they put this Marshal Murray in place.
I believe that in both spirit and substance, our tax system has come to be un-American. Death and taxes may be inevitable, but unjust taxes are not. The first American Revolution was sparked by an unshakable conviction. Taxation without representation is tyranny.
We were just, in society, we didn't fit in society very well because we could see all these things that weren't right. We were trying to go by the Bible and by the Constitution of the United States, and we could see the country was not.
The government pushed him more and more and more in a certain way. And what you got is you got two people, the government and Gordon, or two entities, both with blinders on, refusing to look at the possible side routes or alternatives that might be available. And when you have that, you got them both going towards a collision course.
Bud Warren, the marshal in North Dakota, knew that it was an invalid warrant. He tried to convince Ken Muir, who had taken over his position as the head marshal in North Dakota, that it was an invalid warrant. And Bud Warren told me personally that Muir said, you did things your way while you were marshal, and now I'm going to do things my way. So he did things his way.
The IRS, interestingly enough, did not have a large role to play in this because, first of all, the violation that the marshals were out to arrest Gordon Kahl for was not an IRS violation. It was a parole violation. And so we really were not directly involved.
They aren't the nicest bunch in the world, the IRS. Anyhow, we were down there in the office, and so finally I said, okay, how much does Gordon owe you people? We want to know. We're going to pay this thing. And they wouldn't give me any answer. They says, we don't know. I says, well, what are you after them for? I says, let's get it over with. Oh, they couldn't do it. We'll let you know. But they never did let us know.
Well, at any rate, they put this lien on our farm, or part of our farm, and they had an auction. But nobody bid on the property because everybody knew what they were doing. There were U.S. Marshals and possibly others at the auction that day, and I think that their attempt was maybe to get my dad to come out in the open or something at that time. I don't know.
He flat dead. He said, they're going to kill me. He said, and I know it. And he said, they've already same as took the farm away, you know, and I thought, well, man, never lied to me or never pulled any stuff on me before, you know. Maybe they are going to kill him, I don't know.
So we were setting up these meetings, and he would come up and speak to these farmers, explain to them what's happening with these farms, why they're being foreclosed on, what's really going on here. Some of these farmers have spent millions of dollars on their farms already, and they still don't own them. You know, it's all been paid in interest to the bank. Our objective was to try to establish what's called a township government. And the object in that is to try to curb federal expansion powers over the everyday lives of the individual.
A U.S. Marshal who was coming through Jamestown and stuff and informed us that they did have a misdemeanor warrant for this gentleman.
Who's that Marshal?
Carl Wigglesworth.
People that knew Gordon were quite serious that we should stay away from him. They told us point blank that he will shoot you. But at that point, with the active warrant, someone had to do the job. So
I'm the type of police officer that won't back down from anything. And just because Gordon Kahl made threats was not going to scare me from doing my job. I got up from dinner and told my wife I had to go check on something, which I was going to go check on, see if the meeting was going on yet, or to see if anybody had showed up. Because I had in my mind since Thursday that if Gordon Kahl showed up, that I would arrest him on the marshal's warrant.
This person was absolutely no threat to the citizens of our community. He had a real tough time with the federal government. That was not our problem.
He thought that I was crazy in doing what I was doing. He tried to tell me to let the marshals handle it.
I begged the deputy to contact the marshals and call it off because they were getting into more than they could handle.
Hello? Mr. Cheshire? Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry to bother you on Sunday. I don't know, one of the officers from Stutsman County just called in reference to a teletype that was put out about a Gordon Kahl. Yeah. Apparently your office had a warrant for him. Right.
Okay, this officer knows where he's at this time.
So this is where I ended up that afternoon, is right where I'm sitting now, and the clinic is straight ahead of us.
Bismarck 5206.
5206, Bismarck.
5206 and 7 are 10876 Jamestown area.
I'm in the National Guard, and I had drill that day. And I was on my way back to Medina, and I had the police radio in my car. So I could hear the marshals talking back and forth, but I couldn't quite get what was going on.
Stand by with the marked units in case we need them right away.
10-4, stand by with confirmation.
5206, cancel that. We don't want to go any further than what we're going right now.
Then I was told that Gordon Kahl was in town, and the marshals were coming to serve the warrant on him.
At the time they exited the back of the clinic, they all were carrying Mini 14 rifles. They put the rifles in the station wagon, and at that point they saw me.
We noticed that there was someone sitting down the street in a pickup. I believe it was a Ford pickup, but I'm not sure. And he was watching us with a pair of binoculars.
Somebody drove around, and I don't know this day who it was, and said, "Gordon, I think you're being set up."
Intentional unit vehicle moved around in the front of the building, out of my sight at this time.
I went and I talked to Dad for a moment by myself, and just in case, I decided that it would be best if he and I changed clothes.
The first thing that came to my mind was that, you know, they were going to switch cars or something, you know, because they knew something was up. They were very suspicious people.
Bob, is there another unit out here that we were supposed to come up on?
Trying to get hold of them. 4676, 5206, or 1760.
When I met them, they told me they wanted to set up a roadblock. And then I knew I was in the middle of it.
They didn't know what Gordon Kahl looked like. They had this warrant for him, but none of the officers had ever met him.
They were very professional. And, you know, it seemed like they knew what they were doing right away.
1673, you don't have intentions of making a stop there, do you?
Within a block of the railroad tracks is a trailer court. And typically in a small North Dakota community, people that live in trailer courts are young families with young children.
Can't you go up out of town away? 5205, there's a couple of avenues of escapes up that way. We just thought to cut them off here at the railroad tracks was going to cut off their avenues of escape. No, there ain't no avenues of escape.
I didn't want any shooting in my town.
Okay, that's 10-4. We'll go.
I remember stressing to him that, you know, that these guys are armed. They're armed heavy.
And I said to Gordon, now, if there's going to be any trouble here, I'll stay here at the clinic. And he says, there isn't going to be any trouble. He said, we're just going to go on home.
Two vehicles pulled out from the south side of the clinic.
You're going to have to stop both these vehicles. We're bringing up the rear. You got two station wagons coming at you. He was wearing blue and blue jacket, blue pants. We're behind the second station wagon. We're just crossing the tracks.
It wasn't very long. We weren't up there maybe, I'd say maybe 2 minutes when they came over the cheese plant hill there.
As we come up on this hill, we see about, a half to a mile down the road north of us was this roadblock.
You know, I don't think at that point they still knew exactly what was going on.
Right.
Until they saw those other units up ahead, and then they panicked.
I seen him come flying up over the hill, and I seen the gun out the window.
So we see Dave and Gordon turning around to go back where we came from.
And so I was hollering at my father, who was in the other car, and I was pointing back behind us.
Cheshire and Hobson both got out of the vehicles, and they were still talking to me and asking me, you know, which one is he, you know.
The marshal on the passenger side, which I didn't know was a marshal at that time, he was already stepping out even before the vehicle had come to a stop, and he had a riot shotgun with him.
Back us up, we'll hold him.
They were yelling, United States Marshals,
you're going to die.
We have an arrest warrant for Gordon Kahl. He's the only one we're interested in.
They were going to blow your fucking heads off.
Put the guns away.
He was real erratic.
Things like that. There was no obscenities yelled by Cheshire or Hobson.
I told my mom as I was getting out, I said, get on the floorboard.
So I got on the floorboards and I just began to pray because I knew that was the only thing left. Prayer was going to save us.
So I started walking towards the telephone pole, which was...
It was in the ditch, would have been off to my left.
He was aiming at me. My father got out right after this also.
Gordon got out of David's car, and that's when I identified him.
And then he aimed the rifle at my father.
Come on, we need him closer. Pull him in closer. Pull him in closer.
He was calling for us to get up there, and all that.
We're looking right in the face of these guys. Let's go.
Well, you know, I would have wanted us up there, too.
You guys reading this? We got one behind the telephone pole.
And we had Yori off to our left.
We got one in the station wagon.
And Scott Paul was on the other side of the station wagon.
And one in the Hornet.
And Gordon was crouched, you know, between the door as it was opened.
Hey, you guys, bring yourselves up here. We're standing looking these guns right in the face. Come up behind them.
When we were 150 yards back there, I could hear yelling.
You've only got 1 point in your direction. We got 2 point in our direction. Get in the damn car and move this way.
Well, we finally moved up there.
What's this guy got the gun? What's he saying? Is he saying anything? What's your problem?
I didn't know who was who.
Is the subject here with each one of these three guys?
I had never seen Gordon before or a picture of him.
Yeah, apparently he changed clothes. FO said he thinks he's in there, but he's not sure.
When I see him, do I shoot him?
My suggestion was call in some more units so we at least have the manpower and the backup here. You know, right now it's kind of a standoff.
You know, these guys are standing out there with guns and they're pointing them at us. You know, they're not just standing there holding them. They're pointing them at us. I'm sure they got their safeties off, ready to do whatever.
Now you're getting somebody in the downtown house. Watch it. He sees you going. He's coming around to get you.
Hobson, I don't know what made him decide to do what he did.
He jumped up and he ran, and I seen him get up and start running.
The guy had balls, let me tell you.
Yeah.
You know, right out in the open, you know, run across the road behind him.
And when he did, I hollered to my father. I said, "Look out behind you."
Hobson comes up to the wagon, and he slams his shotgun down on top of its wagon. Makes a pretty good sound.
And right there, I just said to myself, here we go. Everybody was yelling, "Whose shot was that? Who shot?"
Well, I remember getting hit. I remember my gun going off.
Officer hit! Officer hit!
I had shot Yori.
I tried to get up.
Let's go, guys! I'm hit! Guys! 52-6 is DOA. 5200 DOA. 5207 badly injured.
When I realized the shooting was over, I didn't hear any more bullets. I raised up my head to look around, and I saw, this is hard. I saw Yuri. He said, "Take care of the children." Travis, he said, "I'm not going to make it." But he said, he said, I did what I had to do. And I said, "Yes, you're going to make it." I said, "You will make it. I know you will."
And I looked up, and Gordon Kahl was standing there. And he had a Mini 14 rifle in each hand. One in each hand. Well, I asked him if it was worth it. And he looked at me and kind of smiled, and he said, "To me it was."
This is News 11 with Maria Pessler.
Good evening. 2 U.S. Marshals are dead. 3 other law enforcement officers are wounded following a gun battle near Medina, North Dakota tonight. 2 suspects are in custody. 3 others reported still at large and believed to be armed and extremely dangerous.
He never owed any money.
Kenneth Muir of Fargo was a presidential appointee to his position as United States Marshal.
President Reagan has personally visited with Lois Muir, Lynn Cheshire, and Doris Hobson.
Robert Cheshire had worked up at the Bismarck office for about 5 years.
He never owed any money.
Where do you think he might be?
I really have no idea, and I could really ask your help, whoever has seen him, to give us a hand and locate him. We honestly do not know.
Okay.
Did Mark tell you the media caught him?
Where'd they catch him
At his home. They found out about it. 2 of them called him this morning.
Who called?
And I guess it came on radio somewhere that Gordon Kahl's body's been exhumed and they don't know where it's going or what's happening.
As far as the allegations go, I'm familiar with several of them. One being that the individual in the residence was in fact not Gordon Kahl.
10 minutes after 6, or right close to that, I heard 2 shots hit me right there at the, near that fuse box. and I knew somebody got shot. And then almost immediately, the FBI agent come up, and he says to me, "Is Gordon Kahl clean shaven?" See, they went in and looked at the body now, because they couldn't tell who they shot, because it exploded the face so bad. And see, that must have been when they put out word that they thought they shot Bill Wade.
Well, my first contact with the actual incident that happened right here was that I was sitting at my home on the evening of June the 3rd, and the phone rang. And so I went and answered the phone, and the person calling said, "Bill, is that you?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so." He said, "Well, they just put out over the radio that you've been killed." And I said, "Well, I don't believe so, because I'm sitting here, I think, very much alive."
So I think he's still alive.
And that's just based on, tell me again, why you think he's still alive?
Just for what they offered me in Fargo. If they knew this was all a mistake, they should have never been there. They should have, all this, I think they offered the same thing to Gordon.
Kahl's son, 23-year-old Yori Kahl, was wounded in the gunfight. He was arrested and is hospitalized under guard in Jamestown. Late this afternoon, Kahl's 62-year-old wife, Joan, and two men from Streator, North Dakota, 53-year-old David Ronald Brower and 25-year-old Vernon Allen Wegner, were brought to Fargo to make a court appearance on charges of aiding and abetting the assault of a federal officer. Gordon Kahl and 29-year-old Scott Fall of Harvey, North Dakota, remain at large.
They put Yori in the hospital and operated on him. Now, while he was in the hospital, there was a federal marshal on each side of his bed for 2 weeks. He was chained to the bed. He thought I was dead, and when the family went to see Yori at the hospital, they wouldn't let them see him. They thought he was dead, but they didn't dare tell me because I was in jail. Gordon's gone somewhere, I don't even know where, and I don't know who's dead. I don't know what happened.
I'm here to do just one thing, and that is to appeal to my husband to give himself up and surrender before anybody else gets hurt. Please, Gordon, please. It won't hurt you. I've been treated real well here. Our son is in critical condition. 2 men are dead. Others are going to be hurt. I don't want you dead, too. Please, I can't take any more. Please turn yourself in. I can give you some numbers to call.
I thought I should do this. The prosecuting attorney had told Rambo that if I didn't do it, for sure I'd get 10 years. Well, I thought, well, what's 10 years for me? I could do a lot better out here somewhere. So I did. I went before national television, and I'm so sorry I did that.
There's also a Jamestown.
Police said Gordon Kahl seemed to have built himself a fortress on the North Dakota prairie, his house protected by landmines and booby traps. Scott Fall, a companion of Kahl's, turned himself in. The men were described as fanatic members of a survivalist group that opposed all governments. Police surrounding Kahl's farmhouse were slowed by fear of the arsenal they thought Kahl might have inside.
We used tear gas and ordered him to come out. He did not. They then entered the house, and they have secured the premises. He's not there.
Was tear gas fired into the house?
Yes, it was.
Some of the things the media reported that there were mines, that trap wires around the house. Well, there was some wire around the house, around the garden, the flower garden there, to keep out. I think Gordon had some goats on the farm.
The indictment charges 63-year-old Gordon Kahl, Kahl's son Yori, and Scott Fall with premeditated murder and aiding and abetting in the shooting deaths of U.S. Marshal Kenneth Muir and Deputy Marshal Robert Cheshire, Jr. Gordon Kahl's wife, Joan, was indicted as an accessory to murder, as were Vernon Wegner and David Brower.
It's kind of basically like Custer and the Indians. The explanation for Custer and the Indians was that Custer, quite frankly, did not think the Indians were going to fight.
I doubt that there's ever been such a travesty of criminal procedure anywhere ever.
How we ever ended up with 12 people that said that they hadn't heard anything about this is beyond me.
How could you have policemen doing this in this manner, under those circumstances? It was more consistent with essentially, death squads in El Salvador.
If a federal judge doesn't want to go, you ain't going to get rid of him.
They had their minds made up before the trial barely began.
They killed these people, so what can you do? That's the way the laws are set up, and that's justice.
You didn't dare criticize anything any of the marshals had done. I mean, it just seemed like the defense attorneys were walking on eggs all the time.
Well, they treated it as good.
Authorities say the prime suspect is a radical survivalist, a fanatic, an ultra-right-wing tax rebel. Tonight they're also calling him a killer.
Uri Kahl was brought to the federal building in Fargo under heavy guard. At the preliminary hearing, an FBI agent related statements Uri Kahl made to the FBI a few days after the shootout. The agent said Uri stated, quote, "I might have shot the man in the white shirt. I can't remember much." The agent said the man in the white shirt was U.S. Marshal Robert Cheshire, one of the marshals who died in the shootout. The FBI agent testified Uri said he may have fired more shots after that. He also testified Uri said, quote, "It could have been I shot first."
I feel that probably one of the marshals shot first.
Uri Kahl.
Muir fired the first shot.
Ken shot the first shot, and he hit Uri.
Well, unfortunately for Uri, that isn't what he said. Uri's interview said that he had fired first.
There was a statement supposedly made by Uri in the hospital where he had, in one form or another, essentially indicated that he thought he might have fired first.
And I'd asked him at one time, I said, "Did you take the first shot?" And he says, "Yeah."
Cap says
Uri pulled the trigger and killed Robert Cheshire.
He looked over there and he saw Uri Kahl looking like he had just fired.
I didn't actually see him fire at that point, but I heard it come from there.
Like I say, he was under sedation, and he had mentioned even at other times that I might have shot first.
We produced a doctor who came in and said, under these drugs, you cannot be certain that people fully understand what is going on, or that they are even fully aware of what they're saying.
So to me, no, it wasn't really clear to him that he did it either. He thought he might have.
The government produced an expert that said, oh yes, that was possible. That sure. I mean, you always know what you're doing. I mean, you're aware. And of course, Judge Benson then ruled, well, that their expert was better than ours.
Now, whether I actually fired the first round or not, I don't know. And the reason that I don't know is because this all happened extremely rapidly right here. I remember getting hit in the chest, and I remember thinking to myself that I had been shot from behind. I mean, it felt like it took my lungs right out.
Ken Muir had, in fact, probably got off one round before he died, and that round had hit Uri Kahl right in the gun. And if it hadn't been for the gun, Uri would have been dead. It would have gone right through his heart. I said, what would you do if they gunned your son? And they said, I'd have done the same thing Gordon Kahl did. I'd have defended my family and my property. Well, after talking to the man, I guess we ought to put quotes around the man, because at this point in time we are not sure whether the man was Gordon Kahl or not. And after talking with the man and hearing his story, he believed that government agents would shoot him on sight, kill him on sight, because they did not want the information that he had about things that were going on in North Dakota, that they did not want them to come out in a trial.
I never could figure that one out. They brought that gun in when the trial was almost over, This is one of these examples. The attorneys all went up to the judge's bench, and it was put in a plastic bag, and nothing was done about it. It wasn't discussed, and that was in with our evidence in the jury room.
Gordon Kahl had thought in his warped mind somehow or other that was going to affect the trial.
I was never allowed, as Yorie's attorney, to specifically look the jury in the eye and say, no, this is why this is important, because it resulted in Lynn Crooks' admission to the jury that, yeah, it was probable that Ken Muir fired first.
It certainly didn't convince me that Ken Muir had fired the first shot. What it convinced me of was that Ken Muir had been a pretty good marksman, and he'd gotten off one round, and I felt certain regret that he'd hit the gun. Because of all of the people that I would have just as soon had Ken hit home with a bullet, Yorie would be very close to the top of the list.
Roadblocks were set up in Medina this morning. About 30 FBI agents and U.S. Marshals searched the Medina Clinic and the adjacent home of Dr. Clarence Martin.
He had gotten more bitter because of the harassment which I think he's been under. They should have picked him up when he was walking down the streets of Carrington, as his daughter said. We're two plainclothesmen that could have walked up on either side. Why light in a tremendous explosive situation when his wife and his son and his friends are with him, and it's to light a fuse when...
This is the focal point. This is where it occurred, and this is where Gordon Kahl was living. If you can think of a more logical place to go, we'll go there. I can't think of anything more logical to go than here.
Even though he may be in hiding, still physically near the family.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it's, I do.
How does the criminal mind operate?
I, Gordon Kahl, a Christian patriot, wish to put down on paper a record of events which have just taken place so the world will know what happened.
In a transcript of the letter allegedly written by Gordon Kahl, Kahl claims responsibility for killing the marshals and wounding 3 other law enforcement officers. But officials will not comment on the letter unless it's brought up in court as evidence.
Judge Benson's a very good follow-the-rules type of judge. We felt very confident that he wouldn't accept it, and he didn't.
I think that Gordon Kahl did all the killing. I really do.
Gordon Kahl probably caused the death of those who died.
That's the biggest concern we had probably in the case, was that somehow or other Gordon Kahl gets the blame for everything, and these guys are just kind of along for the ride.
David Brewer sat in the car, didn't touch his gun, got out of the car, laid down on the pavement, and prayed.
But he didn't have no gun, or he didn't do no shooting, but he just rode along. So then we all settled on, I think he got 10 years.
We were in a position, or willing and ready, to give Brewer the same deal that we gave Mr. Wagner.
We're interested, I guess, in how you're feeling right now, for one thing.
Well, I feel pretty good. I'm real relieved. It's great to be walking out here than down there or wherever I was going to go.
No, he did not use as good a judgment as Mr. Wagner did.
You know, we're going to ask you this question. You're supposed to respond to it this way, you know, and I'm sitting there, wow, is this the way this shit works, you know? You know, it was all rehearsed the day before we went in there.
With the judge and everything?
Oh, the judge is right there, yeah. He knew what was going to go on the next day, you know, then we just more or less, oh, yeah, this is the way it was laid out, you know.
During the trial, I remember one of the defense attorneys asked him, well, Mr. Wagner, you pled guilty, right? And he said, yeah. And they asked him, he said, well, to what? And he just sat there, and sat there, and sat there, and sat there. And the defense attorney asked him, he said, did you hear me? He said, yeah, I heard you. He said, well, what did you plead guilty to? He said, I don't know. He said, I'd have to look at the paperwork and see. He said, I have no idea. Dave had no idea. Vernon certainly didn't have any idea. He was just there, you know. And if you had been there, you would be here.
prosecuting attorney Lynn Crooks called 2 FBI special agents to describe the events surrounding the shooting. One of them testified a woman witnessing the shootout allegedly saw 29-year-old Scott Kahl shoot U.S. Marshal Robert Cheshire at close range after the gun battle itself had ended.
Once something is placed in the minds of people, that is negative, psychologically, it's very difficult to ever erase the negative impact that has had.
I had a hard time to forget was that they showed us the brains of one of the guys that got killed, Cheshire.
Aldrich identified those items in federal court in Fargo today, including some skull bone fragments. But when defense attorneys charged they were, quote, unnecessarily inflammatory, Judge Benson ruled they would not be examined by the jury.
I don't know the answer. All I know is I presented it like I did, and as honestly as I could, I represented to the jury that the witnesses were probably wrong. And I couldn't say any more than that. I wasn't there.
But he let the jury see some controversial death photographs of the 2 deceased marshals, warning jurors, those photographs will not be pleasant to look at. You should view those photographs objectively. They have been entered to assist you in your judgment.
But they weren't allowed in evidence, but yet they allowed the jury to see them, and they were in the book we had in the jury room.
The last witness of the day was a ballistics expert who, as predicted, cleared defendant Scott Kahl of eyewitness accounts which had him shooting Cheshire in the skull at point-blank range.
And we proved it was false. I suspect the jury at the end believed that.
But they kind of pinned it on to Scott Kahl.
I don't think there's anything more dangerous than an eyewitness.
Gordon Kahl had flown from North Dakota to Arkansas in February. He had remained hidden at an undisclosed location in western Arkansas for, I guess, 2 or 3 months before moving on to Art Russell's and then to the Ginters.
He came in and somebody brought him that I knew, and he told me a story, and he says, will you put me up? I said, yeah, I'll put you up.
And I found out who he was. I said, Leonard, we can't keep him here. You need to get rid of him. You need to take him somewhere. I said, I can't stay here with that man here when he's wanted. I never met the man before. I didn't know what he was or anything, but I did find out after he stayed here a few days he was a very nice fella. He was real good about helping. He was a real polite fella. You didn't have to wait on him or anything. He was a real nice guy, but I just didn't like the idea of him being here and maybe getting us mixed up in trouble.
The search for Gordon Kahl is now into its 4th day across 4 states and 2 Canadian provinces. Yesterday, more than 100 federal agents and local police stormed a central North Dakota farmhouse only to find that their suspect wasn't there.
I just figured that the government wanted to put on a show of force and impress people, and I guess they did.
We did everything in our power to make sure that they did not wind up having tax protester lawyers, that they had normal, hard-working, legitimate defense lawyers.
But we weren't going to get anywhere by picking on the 2 marshals, or the marshal and the deputy marshal who had been killed.
These lawyers basically defended on the basis of
the defense was one of self-defense,
which was what we wanted.
In retrospect, sitting here today, I'd have to say that was a mistake.
What about all these other years when they were terrorizing my dad and they were terrorizing his employers, when they were harassing him and the numerous other things that they did through all those years? I mean, does that become meaningless? I mean, that had no part in this? Of course it did.
When they got out of the Ram Charger out there, he and Cheshire, he had his badge on, and Cheshire told him to take it off.
One would think that when there are that many of them, that somebody would have been in a uniform, somebody would have been driving a police car, but they weren't.
And all of that was covered in the instructions to the jury. I mean, they can do that. They don't have to have a uniform on. They don't have to, you know.
The marshals basically were legally entitled to open fire anytime they wanted.
Muir brought it on himself. I mean, there was, as far as I'm concerned, there was no excuse for the action they took.
FBI Special Agent Dick Blaze says the investigative unit is now becoming a smooth-running machine.
We're really getting into the nuts and bolts of the investigation at this point. And certainly not discouraged at this point. I'm optimistic, I really am. I believe that we're making progress. Yeah, I think it's looking up. I don't know where he is.
I don't know, I've done had them son of bitches down here on my ass come in my house here and throw their shit around.
Who's that?
Times. Goddamn FBI.
What I'm saying is I think there should be a degree of responsibility here and stop and analyze what your actions are doing. What you're doing is hampering our efforts, and that is something I can't stop you, but I think someone ought to think of what you're doing.
Have you learned?
Right now you don't know where he is.
No, I don't know where he is. No. And I think whichever way we go, with the type of posture that we're in, he's going to know where we're going.
There'd been a bunch of damn reporters coming down, aggravating the shit out of us, you know. My wife and I was sitting there one day, and she said, I'm about to get tired of this shit. What about you? And I said, me too. You don't smoke coffee?
I'm fine.
I said, well, me too. And about that time I saw, God dang, I wasn't even watching that. I saw, that's all right, hell, I'll be in a minute. I saw two guys walk past that window. I said, hell, there's two more of them right now. She said, I'm just going to tell them that we don't want to talk to them.
It's the biggest story in my life as a news reporter, covering it. I mean, this is a story that brought in the national media. It made the national news. You were getting phone calls from the New York Times, the Baltimore Sun, the Washington Post, the LA Times. We just started to look into these extremist groups that seemed to have this hold on Gordon Kahl, or Gordon Kahl had on them.
Immediately, the news media labeled him as a neo-Nazi,
right-wing paramilitary extremists.
posse comitatus.
They are vigilantes who call themselves posse comitatus.
Kahl's view of the world was a blend of religious zealotry and political extremism that merged into a twilight zone of fanaticism. Strange, disturbed man.
And a violent person, and just be real careful when, when he was around.
Critics describe the posse as neo-Nazi racists bent on anarchy.
The meeting in Medina was a meeting like that. A lot of people that went to that meeting went there thinking, do these guys have the answer to help to solve the farm problem?
The first tactic is to smear him, call him a fascist, a neo-Nazi, something, put a stigma on him.
Well, as it turned out, what was being discussed at this stupid meeting in Medina was whether or not blacks are going to be allowed into this stupid township.
They went through the trial trying to claim that they were not going to do that. Their point was not to go and essentially, portray these people as racists, or to portray these people as tax protesters or right-wingers or left-wingers, or however you want to put them on that political scale.
The government went with their little propaganda campaign, and then the judge very conveniently issued a gag order on us, so we couldn't tell our side of the story.
But yet, the trial was permeated constantly by references from the prosecution team of what they considered to be outlandish or crazy attitudes, and these crazy attitudes reinforced the view that these people were so dangerous.
I don't know that I ever heard of the posse comitatus until this trial.
It was scary at different times because every time they took us from the courthouse to the motel, they took different routes. So there was something going on that you could expect anything.
There is a possibility that a group like, their followers could decide to get revenge or whatever,
As we begin our final approach to Los Angeles International Airport, we'd like to thank you for flying with us.
It's caused tremendous hardship on my family and my career. I was fired twice. They started following me night and day. No one was interested.
And I was the one that had the man at my house, and I wouldn't have had him there if our government would have been decent. But they was not decent. They was going to kill him. They put out the word that he had to come in as a body, not as a prisoner. And so, what could I do? I was justified in keeping him there.
Boil it all down, and what kind of people are they?
They're dangerous people.
extremely dangerous people. They're well armed and they know how to use their weapons, and they have avowed that they're going to resist this.
Well, they treated him like he was a killer. And Gordon, he was no killer. And I used to tell him that. They'd call him this killer. Would you report this killer if he came to your home? I said, no. I'd help him. And I'd always say, quit calling him a killer.
Your house is full of bullet holes. The windows ain't no more. This is just a preview of what we've got in store. We're the FBI, the CIA, and the President of the United States. We're calling you to come on in, or it gets too late. Calling Gordon, call. Calling Gordon, call. Gordon, please call home. Calling Gordon, call. Calling Gordon, call. Please, please, Gordon, call home.
We are going to offer a $25,000 reward for information leading to the apprehension of Gordon Kahl.
In our 10 children, that dear lady of mine never had any trouble having every one of them. But I was not at home at the time this 10th child was born. And so Karen was not like any of the rest of the kids. She would not clean her house. She would not do things like the rest of them to be obedient to her job.
I would like to mention one thing relative to the reward, and that is to assure that anybody who would provide that information, that their anonymity would be protected.
You mean you can get away without paying income tax on it?
I couldn't hardly believe that as much as she thought of Gordon Kahl, that she would go and turn him in to tell the FBI where he went to.
Well, we made it. Good to see you. Glad you made it. Hey. Okay. You're coming with me? Yeah. Yeah, this is a homicide investigation. It's his body.
I was shocked, I think, with the jury because I felt that so many of them had made up their mind that they're totally guilty before the trial even began.
In my own opinion, I think that Mrs. Kahl should have had a little bit of punishment out of this deal, because she was in the car that was the getaway car. She was in the car when it left the schoolhouse. In my own opinion, I did kind of hang tight on it.
The only evidence that they had against Joan in the crimes that were being charged was that she was married with Gordon, and she went for a ride with him that Sunday afternoon to a meeting. That was it. That was the extent of the evidence that they had against her.
In fact, one of the jurors had told me afterwards that the majority sentiment was that everyone wanted to convict her, but they basically felt that, well, given the court's instructions, the government's evidence just isn't strong enough. And they finally went really on reasonable doubt, but with some reluctance. And I don't know if he was telling me that simply to stroke me a little bit, because he happened to be a guy that I had known probably most of my life, which to this day I don't understand why they left on the jury. A guy named Ponko from Hankinson, who had known my family. I guess he'd known me when I was just a little shaver. He was much older than I was.
That was one of the first things I thought of when after I got picked to be a juror, that I knew him, as I was in high school and they were in the grades at that time.
So obviously the juror did not say that. And if that's true, and an attorney has knowledge that a juror, in essence, has perjured themselves, they have an obligation to disclose that.
God, one hell of a case. Since Wednesday, we've been
trying to get this escorted.
Yeah, started in North Dakota.
Oh, really? You know, one of the guys up at the said there was something about the guy might be a cop killer or something like that. Or,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Somebody said something like that.
Yeah, he was a cop killer.
Oh.
But there's some other possible problems too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's some problems what the cops did possibly too. This case is just unbelievable.
Oh.
So, it'll be in the paper sometime before too long.
Okay.
I wish we could say a little more, but...
That's okay. Hey, I think we said too much already in a way. I mean,
that's all right.
We've got them out of here, so we're okay.
He was under no delusions, you know, about what was going to happen with him, what was happening with us. I don't think he knew exactly what he should do in that particular, you know, situation. I mean, what do you do? They got U.S. Marshals running all over the country offering people hundreds of thousands of dollars to turn him in.
In a soft, polite tone, with heavy sighs and a few tears, Yuri Kahl today told his version of the shooting incident. He said some men pulled up, their guns pointing out their car windows, quote, like something out of a terrorist movie. Kahl said the men never identified themselves and that it was his father who asked them to, quote, put your guns down and back off. There's no reason for anybody to be hurt over this thing.
It's hard because the law is the law, and yet you feel that in so many ways they weren't really guilty.
It just seemed like they covered every angle that the defense could possibly come up with, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you had to follow the judge's instructions.
He worked on the same floor, in the same building, in the same courtroom with one of the dead marshals. He had no business sitting on that trial whatsoever, clearly. He couldn't help but have been prejudiced. I'd have been prejudiced in his position.
And we raised that particular issue, and in fact, we asked Judge Benson to recuse himself. And the judge refused, saying that he did not believe that he could not be fair and impartial.
If a federal judge doesn't want to go, you ain't going to get rid of him. Are you sure that's the right one? Because you didn't see it coming off. Has he got a number on it or something? Or?
It was about 3 p.m. and this airplane was flying back and forth, and I said to Gordon, I says, do you want to leave? I says, I know they're going to come and hit us tonight. He says, no, he says, I think I'll stay and surrender to him because I can do my son a lot of good and maybe get him out of jail.
Family members were still and silent tonight as the jury's foreman handed over the sealed verdict envelope and the clerk of court started reciting the results on the 27 charges. But as the first verdicts were read, finding Scott Fall and Yuri Kahl guilty of second-degree murder, their women immediately began crying. When the verdicts were all in, they were sobbing. But tears turned to hostility once outside the courtroom.
This is what happens when a public officer is told to file away a file and misuses his public office.
Based on instructions from her attorney, Mrs. Kahl refused to discuss her husband's anti-tax philosophy or what happened during the shooting.
Generally, we believe that this was the type of verdict we'd come up with, that we know that this is what the government is capable of doing, and they didn't set out to ambush Gordon Kahl and these men just simply to have it thrown away in a courtroom in 2 seconds.
The day that this happened, we had our little fire sitting out here on the cement, and they had been working on it, and there was airplanes flying overhead all the time, and we'd been picking strawberries that day also. And then that evening, why, we'd kind of figured something was going to happen with these planes flying over because they'd flew over a couple of days.
I sat in that chair there, and something kept telling me I had to get out of this house. Something was going to happen, and I had to get out and look this situation over. Well, I just got out, just making the turn up the hill, and they came in.
And I come walking out this door, see what's going on, and the sheriff was standing right there. And he grabbed a hold of me, brought me out around the corner of the garage. And Leonard and them were standing there. They had handcuffs on him. They grabbed me and handcuffed me right there.
I couldn't see what was going on, and pretty soon 3 guys walked into that door, and they disappeared from my sight, and it wasn't long I heard a shot inside the house, and right away the machine gun started shooting all over, and then we were taken back here to this spot right here. I laid about right here, and Norma laid up there. They pushed us down. The guy kept threatening, "I'm going to kill you, son of a bitch."
They was kind of rough with us. They just more or less kind of drugged me over to that car. When I lost my carpet slipper, I asked them if I could please get my carpet slipper, and they told me I didn't need that goddamn carpet slipper. That's just the language they used to me.
There was a wood pile there, and there was a guy with a machine gun. He just kept changing clips and shooting at that house while I'm laying here for about 10 minutes.
And as we was walking up the hill, while we looked back, and we could see that our house was burning.
A 3.5-month manhunt apparently ended in a blazing shootout at a remote Arkansas farmhouse last night. The state medical examiner today tentatively identified a charred body as that of notorious fugitive Gordon Kahl, member of an anti-tax group wanted for the murders of 2 federal marshals. David Dick has more on the story.
What was believed to be Gordon Kahl's last hideout smoldered and ruined during the night, and the heat continued to ignite unspent ammunition. At first, reporters were kept far back as what one officer called a war was waged.
For about an hour and a half, live rounds of ammunition exploded inside the house. Probably not hundreds or thousands, but tens of thousands of rounds of small and large ammunition, dynamite, possible hand grenades, etc.
When the shooting finally stopped, there were 2 bodies. One burned beyond recognition, but believed to have been fugitive Gordon Kahl. The other, the body of Lawrence County Sheriff Gene Matthews, who had entered the house to arrest Kahl. They had shot each other, and then their bodies rode side by side to the state crime lab.
They got Gordon, shot him in the back of the head and butchered him, burned him beyond recognition.
Put the last nail in the coffin, I don't know. Don't care to know. But I know they done away with an awful fine man. I'll guarantee you that.
Eddie? Abe? Fire! Ready? Aim! Fire! Order, arm! Left foot. Ready? In. Reset. Go! In the sweet
for it. Actually, it's, yeah, they're going to sign it.
Yeah, but hopefully they're here.
They'll sign for themselves.
They said they, okay.
We continue with In the Line of Duty, Manhunt in the Dakotas, starring Michael Gross and Rod Steiger.
This had the potential for a movie, and that it would make an excellent movie, but the fact that it would, you know, that somebody would want it, you know, it was a nice, pleasant surprise.
And our goal was to find interesting bad guys and interesting heroes, and a story that would be a little bit more than just an action picture, but also have be about something and be of some interest. And one of the stories that we found was the story of Gordon Kahl.
I guess my initial reaction is that, you know, the movie isn't the book.
He was the kind of people that I think have always built the quality in a nation. Every nation, you know, every culture throughout history. The people that saw farther, that cared more, you know, that sacrificed themselves. And this is what I see in him, you know, and this is what I want to carry on.
I'll always think Gordon was right, but mainly right. You know, maybe not in everything he said or did, but I think the majority of the time he was right.
You miss him?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Ever since the team went to Arkansas in 1987 and discovered the chilling facts told by the physical evidence in this case, we have labored long and hard to gather the facts. We have presented these hard facts to Governor Bill Clinton, requesting that a grand jury be convened to see that justice is fully served. On 4 separate occasions, his staff has refused to deal with this matter. Was Gordon Kahl ruthlessly murdered by federal agents? The truth has been elusive in large part because of Arkansas coroner Fahmy Malek, whose work has been widely discredited. The Times investigative team discovered numerous instances where Malek's reports were erroneous. Dr. Thomas Noguchi has confirmed that the separated body parts contained in the body bag are all from the same body, and that the body is the one removed from the Ginter residence in Arkansas. However, we cannot technically prove that the body exhumed is that of Gordon Kahl. To do that, we need something to compare it to.
Anyone who possesses a hat, coat, or comb belonging to Gordon Kahl, please contact us at the American Citizen and Lawman Association in Phoenix, Arizona.
I honestly believed when that trial was over, I honestly believed that that would be appealed and it would be thrown out and they would get a new trial or whatever. I really believed that.
We shook hands with Gordon Kahl and said, "Pleased to meet you," and that was the start of something that ended up with me getting a 5-year prison sentence for conspiracy to harbor a federal fugitive.
I says, a traffic ticket? I says, what's a traffic ticket got to do with capital murder? I says, you're crazy, fella. I says, there ain't no way I'll plead to anything. I says, have you talked to my lawyer?
That's what the blood looked like. I never seen the blood because I come out 3 years, 8 months later, so I never seen the blood.
So the government people was telling everybody a different story than what we were telling them. According to them, there's posse comitatus around every bush.
I was obeying God's law instead of man's law, and I got put in the penitentiary for it.
We view the Internal Revenue Service as part of the solution instead of part of the problem of our country.
If somebody shot my son, do you know what I'd have done to him? I'd have cut him up probably in little bitty pieces after I killed him.
Oh, we gotta stop the annex of federal fanatics. They're a menace to society. There's nothing any worse than federal fanatics, except maybe the KGB.
All right, that's great.
If you're going to release this at tax time, just make sure you're ready for an intensive audit. That'll handle that for you.